this is a TV1 ad. Sorry. We're bringing forward the Working for Families adjustment from 1 April next year. And what that does is give more relief to families who've got kids, because obviously the pressure of things like some food price increases and so on hits harder on family budget than on the individual budget.
To indexing the other tax thresholds?
Well, in fact, if you look at the total movement over the period, they are largely indexation. The top threshold goes from 60 to 80 over that period, is significantly more than the movement indexation. The bottom threshold goes from 9.5 to 20. It goes 9.5, goes 14, 17, 5, 20 over the 3 stages. So that is miles more indexation. The only one which doesn't move much more than that is the middle one, which goes from 38 to 42.5. Well, beyond that is rather a long way into the future, it seems to me. And future governments will want to think about that. I do more refer to that as my 9th consecutive budget, because that's a historic reference to the fact that generally we deliver that into the next 5 after that as well.
Minister, are you confident that this fiscal stimulus won't trigger either an interest rate hike or stop an interest rate cut?
All else being equal, I do not believe that it will affect things in order to lead to an interest rate hike. That's a matter of engagement adjustment of the Reserve Bank, not adjustment of the Minister of Finance. But against the background of an economy which is clearly slowing down, then I think a fiscal stimulus is possible. Also important to remember the fiscal stimulus measures from last year, or this year actually, we're still running a significant surplus to next year when we are not. Looked at in a static sense, it is less of an impact.
And the reprioritisation you talked about there, can you give us a bit more detail?
No, not at all. That's what we have to work on between next year's budget.
Any particular area?
No. No, 1st of October is the earliest date that can be brought in, because RD and business has to have some new time before taxes can be altered. Try and do it immediately if not possible. I think if we said 1st of April, which is after the election, you'd be running the story. Cullen expects people to believe that the tax cuts after the election. I think your persuasive powers are very large, Cullen.
I'm just asking you something, why you bring the normally tax rates and take these out of why?
Because I think people are clearly expressing some concern about the family budget. The fact is we've seen things like dairy prices, a number of other food prices move significantly over the last year. We're obviously seeing petrol prices continue to move in record highs again overnight in terms of the price of oil per barrel. Those are placing stresses on the family budget. I think people want to see something as quickly as possible in that regard. Well, I very carefully said in all the build-up that it's not possible to give large tax cuts. $50 a week instead of 16. Actually, not 16 with full implementation, of course, the 50 never was immediately, that was 3 years down the track. It's some millions of extra spending. That's got to come from somewhere. And the same families who interviewed at length on television and elsewhere also stressed the importance to them of having decent hospital and health services available, the cost of education not becoming too high, and so on and so forth. And the family budget doesn't just consist of income, it also consists of expenditure. And governments have a big impact on that expenditure for families through the cost of healthcare, cost of education, and so on.
When you look at your Crown tax GDP, it declines from 29.5% now to 29.6% in a few years. So you haven't really reduced the amount of tax as a proportion of the economy by that much.
That was a very large change over a 4-year period to cut back into 2% of GDP. It's a very significant change.
That's as much as it
Well, we'll be releasing the cabinet papers in 2 weeks or sometime. What I can tell you is that initially looked at a more substantial package. That substantial package did not make economic sense once the final updated forecasts were available. That was shifted the government into an operating deficit within a couple of years, and much larger cash deficits. That is not sustainable over the long term.
quite comfortable with cash deficits at
3.5 billion, that's the limit of my comfort zone. Because at that point we can say that borrowing is essentially for capital investment. Beyond that point, we're starting to borrow for the groceries. We've been there before, it's a very bad idea.
Did you consider a cut in the GST rate as a way to deliver tax cuts?
No. I'm not in the sense of giving any great consideration to it, because I don't think you'd find anybody who's a tax expert who would argue that the balance between direct and indirect tax in New Zealand is too heavily weighted in favour of indirect taxation. Most tax experts would actually argue for a change in the opposite direction. The government rejects that and there's no intention of following that. And when we see proposals for specific reductions, that is, exemption from GST for certain articles, that of course creates huge complexity in the tax system. It's far from clear who benefits from that in comparison looking at the society overall. And all else being equal, must have higher direct tax rates in order to compensate. There's no free gift fiscally anywhere.
Have you been over tax cuts?
No, I've had high priorities. We have been about restoring public services. We've been about cutting tax for business. We've been about trying to lift our savings record. And we have a huge success on our hands in that regard, in KiwiSaver. Those have been powerfully successful programs across the board. Working with families, the primary healthcare program, the cost of early childhood education, and so on. So I make no apologies for those things. I do note that my opponents are pretending they won't change any of those.
Do you think that this leaves no room? Do you believe this leaves no room for nationals to cut taxes?
I think it leaves no room for a sensible person to cut tax. Which of course is quite different answer.